Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. Sprint races have been confirmed for 2022. That's right, building off the back of 2021 where we saw the inaugural sprint races, we are now going to have some sprint races over the course of the 2022 season as well. And I'm sure there's going to be lots to talk about this in the comments, whether that's good, whether that's bad, whether we're happy to see sprint races back. But there are a few changes to the sprint races and I'd love to go through those with you and sort of talk about how the sprint races change for the 2022 season and whether or not you think those are positive or negative changes. So let's just start off with a generic Formula 1 weekend. The normal weekend sees free practice 1 and free practice 2 on a Friday, Saturday sees free practice 3 and qualifying, and then Sunday sees the Grand Prix, the race of the weekend. For 19 of the 22 races last season, this was the pattern that we saw. Now, last season, there was an introduction of sprint races in 3 different sessions: Silverstone, Monza, and Sao Paulo in Brazil. We saw this sprint race introduced to the weekend, and it shakes up the weekend's look a little bit by getting rid of a free practice and actually introducing this sprint qualifying, it was called last year, where free practice 1 is still on the Friday with a qualifying session now for the sprint race. They then have a free practice between qualifying and the sprint. The sprint is then setting the grid for the race on the Sunday. So it introduced this sprint race and gave the drivers an opportunity to, one, reset the grid a little bit if they qualified poorly, and secondly, introduce some points for those guys at the top. If you came in first place, you managed to pick up 3 points, second place was 2 points, and third place was an extra point for your team over the course of that weekend. So, if you won all 3 sprint races, you could have picked yourself up 9 points over the course of the season. And it got rid of a free practice, introduced this 30-minute sprint race. Some people loved it, some people hated it, and well, it's been brought back for 2022, so it can't have been that bad in the eyes of the people running Formula 1. Now, let's talk about how the sprint races are changing, because I think that's the most important thing here, is what changes have Formula 1 realised need to happen to these sprint races to actually make them a little bit more exciting? Because I think that was the main thing people had a gripe about, was in most of the sprint races last year, maybe Brazil and Lewis Hamilton taken out of the equation, they were fairly boring. There wasn't a lot going on. Obviously, because it's only a 30-minute race, there's no pit stops, there's no real interchanging of teams, and most teams qualify where they're going to qualify, and realistically in the race, we only really see teams changing positions and dropping backwards and forwards because of race pace, and you can't quite get that full idea of race pace over the sprint qualifying. So how is that going to change in 2022? Well, the format is going to stay the same. Free practice and qualifying are still on the Friday. FP2 and the sprint race are still on the Saturday. And Sunday still holds the Grand Prix. So the changes don't start with how the weekend is going to be formatted, but the changes do start with the awarding of pole position. Now, last year we had it that the winner of the sprint race was awarded pole. Now we are going to have it back to how it was before, where if you are starting at the front of the grid for the sprint race, so if you come first in qualifying on the Friday, you are awarded pole for that weekend. So 2021 is kind of going to sit in there as a bit of an anomaly where we've got weird people getting pole positions but not starting on pole for the race, and it's going to be a little bit strange and it's going to be a little bit weird to contend with. And I know that's where some people already have got a little bit of a qualm with this. Surely pole position should be whoever is starting first in the race. But then other people say, the purists sort of say, well, actually, it's the person who can set the fastest lap time. It's the fastest one-off lap in qualifying, which gets you that pole award. And I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Is pole position to you the person that starts at the front, or the person who can put in the fastest one lap? Because they're slightly different things, especially if you've got, a grid penalty or something like that, or with the sprint now, where you could start on pole position for the sprint, but not for the race, and still be awarded that pole position for the weekend. It's going to add sort of a little bit of spice to those pole positions. Over the course of the year as well, the 3 tracks have changed. We've got Silverstone and Monza have been dropped, and instead we're going to see sprint races at Imola and the Red Bull Ring in Austria. Sao Paulo has managed to keep hold of its sprint weekend, so 2 of the 3 changing for the 2022 season as well. I don't think that's going to have a massive impact on what we see. I think Sao Paulo showed the best sprint qualifying over the year anyway, mainly due to Lewis Hamilton starting from the back and gaining about 15 positions. It was insane to watch. But, you know, those other 2, I think it will be interesting to see what happens and whether those 2 can add in a little bit of spice to those sprint races as well. The biggest change, in my opinion, comes with the points scoring system. Now, as I said before, it was 3 points for winning the sprint race. It is now 8 points for winning the sprint race, with 7 points going to second, 6 points going to third, so on and so on and so on, down to 1 point for 8th place. So not only do you have to be in the top 3 now, you can be in the top 8 and still pick up points in the sprint races. And personally, I really love that change. I think it makes the sprint races so much more interesting for those teams towards the middle and back of the pack. Like, thinking about those teams that maybe would have picked up points due to those sprint races, due to picking up, 6th and 7th in those sprint races. I think back to, Pierre Gasly when he dropped out of the Monza sprint race because he lost his front wing and hit into the wall. Then there's other teams that have a real opportunity to jump into that top 8. And yes, they're not going to be able to hold on to that top 8 in an entire race, but they are going to be able to pick up points through the sprint over the course of the weekend. So maybe again, that adds in another dynamic to the sprint. Do you opt to try and get an 8th place finish in the sprint race rather than going for a 10th place finish in the race? And it adds a little bit more for that to me, and I really like that change. I like the fact that they've added that in, and what I thought I'd do actually is go back over the course of the 2021 season and see if that would make any difference to where the drivers would have finished in 2021. And actually, there's some really surprising results from this. So obviously, everybody who won a sprint race, so Valtteri Bottas, not Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen won the sprint races. So they'd have picked up an extra 5 points. When they got that win for 3 points, they'd have actually picked up 8 points. Now, does that make a massive difference to those guys? And here's what here's what the rankings would have looked like if we had 8 points for a win, 7 points for a second, 6 points for a third, so on and so on and so on. Verstappen picks up 15 points. Hamilton picks up 13 points. Bottas picks up another 15. Sergio Perez gets an additional 5. Carlos Sainz gets an additional 7 points. Lando Norris gets an additional 12. Charles Leclerc an additional 10. Daniel Ricciardo picks up 8 more points. Pierre Gasly gets 1. Alonso gets 2 more points. Vettel and Giovinazzi also pick up a point apiece as well. And actually, it made no difference whatsoever. Apart from one clear difference. I've sort of given you a second to have a little look at it. That's right. Lando Norris would have finished above Carlos Sainz by 0.5 of a point if the sprint races have had 8 points for a win in 2021. So didn't make a massive difference, hasn't changed lots throughout the entire season, but does make that tiny little difference between your 5th and 6th place. And when you're talking about McLaren versus Ferrari, when you're talking about drivers' championships, that could be a big switch. 1 point, or even 0.5 of a point in this case, can be the difference between 5th and 6th place. So I'm really looking forward to these new sprint races, the fact they're adding these additional points in, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think sprint qualifying is a good thing for Formula 1? Do you think the changes that they've made to the sprint qualifying is a good idea? Are you happy to see sprint races back, or do you think that, maybe we should try something else? I know Formula E has completely changed up their qualifying sessions and how their qualifying works. Would you prefer to see something like that rather than the sprint races that we're going to have in 2022? I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. Whilst you're there, leave a like as well. Subscribe if you are new to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and if you're watching this when it drops, I'm going to be live on Twitch pretty much dead after this drops on the channel. So head over to Twitch, say hello, and yeah, that'll be all good. See you later.